Good news this morning for anyone who visits the Blue Mountains or lives there. The Minister for Transport and Infrastructure, Andrew Constance, has announced today that there'll be upgrades to the Blue Mountains line to enable new intercity trains to take customers all the way to Lithgow. Trish Doyle is the Labor member for the Blue Mountains, who's long been campaigning about this particular issue. G'day, Trish.
G'day, Josh. How are you this morning?
I'm wonderful. Merry Christmas. Is this good news?
I am pleased that finally, after asking for 3 years for an answer to the question, how much will this cost, Minister, that there is a dollar amount attached. People in the mountains will be pleased to have some sort of answer finally. However, we don't know what this might mean in terms of inconvenience for the rail network to be shut down while these works are carried out. And the Minister would say that they've always planned to upgrade this line, Josh. He would say that, but this is also the Minister responsible for the disastrous CBD light rail, and he's been asking us to trust him for some years now and take him at his word, but his own track record is abysmal. So today's announcement, Josh, actually does nothing for people's concerns around the interior comfort complaints, the lack of reversible seatings on these new trains that are coming from South Korea off the shelf. And we don't know what it's going to look like, the inconvenience along our rail network when they have to slew the tracks, when they do need to rebore some of the tunnels to fit these trains that are too wide to pass one another on the infrastructure.
So has there been a rationale from the Minister about why trains that were too wide were purchased in the first place? I had implied earlier that if you'd bought trains that weren't quite that wide, you might have saved yourself a lot of infrastructure money. And then someone has texted in and said, with regard to the trains, it was already known that the trains were wider than the previous model, but and that they didn't meet these standards in the Blue Mountains. But the government basically felt that they could manage that detail, and that was a price worth paying to upgrade the Blue Mountains line over time, and it was too expensive to do it straight away. And this person is being critical of me, saying, I really think you're drumming up the issue for people that don't understand the details and the reasoning. Am I?
Well, I actually think they're playing catch-up. When I first asked the Minister, did he forget his tape measure when he ordered these trains that actually don't fit the infrastructure in the mountains, and would they travel out to Lithgow, and how on earth they would rebore the tunnels, some of them heritage tunnels, out to Lithgow, he wasn't able to answer that question, Josh. And the only way he is making these fat trains fit the tracks is by reducing the safe passing margin along the tunnels in the safety manuals. So he's taking the cheap and easy option and putting safety on the line. So I think there are still a number of questions the Minister needs to ask, needs to answer, and a number of questions that the Blue Mountains community will want to ask him. So I look forward to further information. But, it's 3.5 long years of asking questions about what this means for the Blue Mountains line.
And we do have a call into the Minister, and hopefully we'll speak with him later in the morning. But isn't it a bit rich of you to say that he's putting safety on the line? I mean, these new trains are, by all accounts, safer than existing trains. The existing network in the Blue Mountains between Springwood and Lithgow, the only trains that can operate there are narrower than all the electric trains operating in the rest of New South Wales, and those don't comply with the disability standards for accessible public transport. So if you're a person living with disabilities, the new system will presumably be better because you're on the same trains as everywhere else on the network that do comply. And isn't it the case that there's always been an intention to modify that rail infrastructure on the Blue Mountains west of Springwood so that you can go from Central all the way to Lithgow on the same trains that are used everywhere else in the state?
That's what the Minister would say, that this has always been part of the plan, but he hasn't been able to answer some of our questions, Josh, in the last 3 years. And there are concerns that commuters, long-haul commuters, have been raising through me with him for those 3 years about the fact that there won't be a vestibule and what that might mean for the comfort of travelling. We're not just travelling a couple of inner-city stations to get to work. Like, a lot of people travel 3 hours each way, and so comfort is incredibly important.
So just to clarify, Trish,
yeah?
let's just specify. I just want to separate some of the critiques here because I don't want to get them muddled up. So in terms of the comfort of these new trains, not everyone's going to be across the criticisms of that. You've raised two things so far. There's no vestibule, and there aren't seats that flip back and forth so that you can face whatever direction you want. Are there other concerns about the interiors of these trains that I should raise with the Minister?
All you need to do is look at the beautiful old leather seats in the V-sets and compare them to these new plastic South Korean models. They're not as comfortable. So there will be things that people do, aspects of these new trains that people look forward to. So apparently there's a tray table and Wi-Fi access. However, for the long-haul commuter, what I'm saying, Josh, is that these concerns were huge concerns that weren't heard as part of the so-called consultation. And in terms of the safety record, Josh, we've already had our Blue Mountains Gazette do a bit of research here a couple of years ago, and the safety record of the Hyundai Rotem trains, especially in Pennsylvania, are woeful. They've already raised huge concerns overseas about the safety of these trains. So I think we've got a lot to see yet in terms of down the line, excuse the pun, of what the minister's plans might look like. And the fact is, in the first place, he forgot his tape measure and they're playing catch-up.
We're speaking with Trish Doyle, who's the Labor member for the Blue Mountains, who's long been campaigning about the particular issue of the train lines between Central Station and Lithgow, specifically west of Springwood, where it's been somewhat dysfunctional because the only trains that have been able to go there have been narrower than the rest of the electric trains. Now the Minister has said there's going to be funding for a $75 million upgrade, but needless to say, there are concerns about that as well, and we have a call into the Minister and we'll hopefully speak to him during the program. Trish, what in your ideal world, had you been Empress of the World, would have been the outcome here? Because, parts of that network are 150 years old. Upgrades were necessary. I assume that you would not say no to a bunch of money to improve the system. How should it have been done?
We should have been building fit-for-purpose trains here. We have the manufacturing capacity in Australia to build those trains here. And yes, the infrastructure and the topography of the Blue Mountains required, especially in some of those heritage tunnels, Josh, and some of those narrow parcels of land between the highway on our ridge line and the railway line required the narrower trains. I think over the last number of years we needed to see far more money pumped into the maintenance of our beautiful V-sets. I agree we needed to have upgrades, but I think that the Minister and the government have been playing catch-up here. They thought they would be saving 25% for the taxpayer, 25% of the overall cost. But they didn't, when they put in the specifications and the tender document, didn't look at what the situation was up here. They were looking at the network for New South Wales, but they didn't take that into account. So I would have said, Josh, build them here in Australia. We would have had local jobs pumped into the local economy, and we would have had a fit-for-purpose train. We wouldn't be needing to do $75 million worth of work now, and I actually think it's going to blow out. The record shows that the Minister's transport projects usually blow out.
Just to clarify for people, the value of this contract is $75 million. If it stays there, then that would be within the $2.3 billion budget for the project. So $75 million for this specific component of the project, when you compare that to $2,300 million, is not a huge amount, but as you say, if it went over budget, that would be a bad thing. A few people are texting in, Trish, saying, questioning your claim that there are leather seats on the old trains, saying no leather seats, only plastic in the current old trains. Another person says leather seats in existing trains, really? Is that true?
The seats that I just sat on recently had the beautiful old leather V-set.
Or maybe very good old
reversible seating, yeah.
maybe good fake leather that's come out of a plastic factory. Entirely possible. Just lastly, the expectation, according to the Minister, of when this is all going to be wrapped up is that the upgrade to the Blue Mountains line is going to start in early 2019, and that the first trains will run on the line all the way to Lithgow in the middle of 2020. Do you believe that?
Let's wait and see. Okay. I'm interested to hear the Minister step us through that process, especially in light of his record with transport projects.
Trish Doyle,
let's wait and see.
Good to talk to you. Merry Chrissy.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Josh.
Thanks
Bye
a lot.
now.
Yep, that's Trish Doyle, the Labor member for the Blue Mountains.